want to thank everyone for coming to the lecture, and today I'm going to speak about something that's very near and dear to me. Well, two things actually, art and science, and the notion that books are catalyst, at least in my world. And what you're seeing here is one of the most significant books in my life, almost life-changing, a book that I was given by my parents at age 9. And it was all about this notion of possibility and a sense of wonder. And I've juxtaposed it next to a sculpture that I've created because I really feel at age 9 these seeds were planted that enabled me to really see possibilities. In terms of me marrying this notion of art and science, this came through a wonderful experience that I was given in 2005. A friend of mine who was curator at the American Center for Physics contacted me and asked me if I might be willing to create 16 new pieces in 3 months to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Einstein's discovery of relativity. My first idea was to say no, but then I thought, it's Einstein, I can't say no to Einstein. So I thought, let me see and use this as a personal challenge to see if I could indeed, while teaching full-time, create 16 new sculptures. And so it was a personal challenge for me to do this. And what I did was, I decided I needed to go back to the source. I needed to go to Einstein. And a little bit of research led me to the book by Aaron Bernstein, Popular Books on Natural Science. And actually, this is a book from the 1800s, so I needed to get my school librarian to do a search, and there were only 4 copies in the United States, one of which was at UC Berkeley, and they were kind enough to send it to me because I needed to see what Einstein read at age 14 that planted that seed of possibility about relativity. And some research I did on Einstein at 14 wondered what it would feel like to ride on a wave of light. And that totally captured my imagination, and I created a piece called Wave Ride for Albert that was inspired by that notion. Recently, I have just completed a 3-month residency working with neuroscientists up at National Institute of Health. And as I look back on that wonderful 3-month experience, what I realized is my sculpture Synapse, which I actually did for the physics show, related in a way to this notion of neurons and the structure of neurons. And actually, to the left here, we see a wonderful drawing by Ramon Cajal, who is considered the father of neuroscience. And what's significant about Cajal's work is that he was trained first as an artist. But when he was about 12, his father said to him that that was not acceptable, that he needed to give up art and become a physician, like Cajal's dad. But I believe, and I've studied a lot of Cajal's drawings, is his ability to be able to see as an artist enabled him to be able to make the kinds of breakthroughs that allowed him to be considered the father of neuroscience. Another area that I'm very interested in is how scientists have created these visualization models of making the invisible visible, which is one thing that we both share in terms of the arts and science. And I was also fortunate to be in residence at the American Philosophical Society, which is located in Philadelphia. And I was invited to come and use their collections of wonderful scientific rare books and manuscripts as a muse in the development of work. And what you see here on the left is just a beautiful example of how scientists have developed these mechanical machines that enable us to understand the wonderful motions of the planets. And that inspired my work, Cosmos for Carl, relating to Carl Sagan, who also was a muse on my journey creating work for the physics show. Another wonderful aspect of being able to investigate the materials at the American Philosophical Society was that they are the caretakers of the Lewis and Clark journals. And I was not aware of that when my journey started there. And this is a wonderful example of several of those notebooks. And to be able to hold these notebooks in your hand and just to fantasize what it must have been like going down the Mississippi River, and not only just recording what I was seeing, but to draw these beautiful observations, it was just a magnificent experience. So one of the ways I get to share these experiences that I've had in these just exciting repositories and collections of libraries is through my artwork. And my work at the American Philosophical Society, which was started by Ben Franklin in 1743 to, quote, promote useful knowledge, whatever that meant in 1743, I also discovered that Ben Franklin had a love for mathematics. And not only did he have a love for mathematics, he had a love for these wonderful mathematical puzzles. One to the left here, one of my favorite ones, the magic circle of circles. And so what I wanted to do was to create a piece of artwork that was a direct response to his beautiful puzzle. Another wonderful experience I had at the APS library is going through the collection of John Archibald Wheeler. And John Wheeler is actually a physicist. He was a physicist. He was a contemporary of Albert Einstein. They taught at Princeton. But he also coined the phrase black hole and dark matter. So that's one of his significance. And what you see here on the left is one of his notebooks that I got to examine. The really, truly wonderful thing about the Wheeler notebooks is the fact that I would read 10 pages of his lecture notes, and then on the 11th page would be 5 pages of him describing a Chinese meal with a fortune cookie, fortune, taped into the notebook. And I love the notion of here is this very high-level scientist who has this human side. He has to eat, and he wants to describe his enthusiasm for a Chinese meal. The piece that I created in response to this particular book was called Black Hole, and it's in honor of John Wheeler. The card catalog was also being de-assessed at the APS library at the time I was being there, and it almost felt like those beautiful card catalog cards were being sucked into this black hole of unknownness. So what you see here in the sculpture is the John Wheeler cards and the black hole cards literally being pulled into the center of this black hole. And I'm happy to report that this sculpture is in the reading room of the library. Probably one of the most prized and most popular books in the American Philosophical Society collection is the Bee Book. And the Bee Book is about the size of an iPhone. It just fits beautiful in the palm of your hand. And what it's doing, it's recording in word and language and also in beautiful drawings the art of beekeeping. And I just absolutely adore this little book, and I needed to create an homage to it with this sculpture that I've called Hive. The end result of my residency at the library was an exhibition, and the exhibition featured my work in relationship to the work that was my muse for these particular works. And this is one of my favorite vitrine cases for that exhibition, because it not only shows my work, but I get to have my work shown next to an actual Ben Franklin drawing in his own hand. And you know, anyone can have a show in a museum, but how many people get to hang with Ben Franklin? Another science icon that has really captured my imagination and came to me as something that I needed to do something with as an artist was the periodic table of elements. This experience actually came to me as I was coming off of a lecture trip in Santiago, Chile, and at first I thought, periodic table, bad food, jet lag, who gets this notion that they're supposed to do something with the periodic table of elements? So I felt that I needed to do something to take that rigid chart that we have all been glazed over and staring at in high school, and to try to make it beautiful, because what it represents is the world above, below, and everything in between. So my journey in trying to get an understanding of this took me to yet another library in Philadelphia, the Chemical Heritage Foundation. And what you see here in the lower corner is the beautiful reading room in the library where I spend a great deal of time. And then on the upper image is the actual museum, and it's just a really wonderful place for anything having to do with chemistry. My way of starting to try to get a handle on what the periodic table meant to me, or means to me, was to examine the beginning of how we visualize science, or visualize the elements. And that goes back to Plato, who was one of the first people to visualize these, and visualize them in a mathematical way as the Platonic solids. So he's used geometry to describe what we consider to be the first elements. My response to that was a series of building my own Platonic solids, but much larger. And these were displayed at an exhibition for the International Year of Chemistry in 2011 at the Chemical Heritage Foundation. But what I wanted to do, since when something is in solid form, it's not really revealing anything, and I was being revealed so much information, I built these solids to be open to reveal, this notion of revealing. And these are made out of mylar and fiberglass rods. They're held on the wall in tension and compression. If I was to pull one of the rods out, they would just cease to be. So there's a little bit of physics happening in here along with chemistry. Another thrill that I had in this library was to examine a first edition of Mendeleev, who is the developer of the first periodic table, a first edition of the actual periodic table. What's so extraordinary about this document and Mendeleev as a visionary is he not only was able to take the elements and put them in a beautiful classification system, but he had this vision of where elements that hadn't been defined yet or discovered would go. And so what he did was he placed little lines that would indicate where he knew an element would be eventually. And to me, this is a true visionary. He's able to see above what they've created and even envision it beyond. My response to my experience with the periodic table and working in the Chemical Heritage Foundation was to create a very interactive, a very beautiful garden-like setting where people could come and really experience the periodic table not as a rigid gridded chart on a wall, but as a beautiful garden made up of atomic flowers. And my inspiration, which you see at the top there, were the orbitals, because the orbitals that make up the elements are the most elusive part of an element. And I thought this is a perfect form, and sometimes they're referred to cloud, they're very, very ethereal, and I thought this is a perfect vehicle for me to express the elements. So what I did is I worked with the 83 naturally occurring elements, starting with hydrogen, helium, had them coming down, spiraling down the column, and then spiraling out on the floor in the Fibonacci spiral, which is the spiral in which a lot of things in nature are based on. And so this was a periodic table that you just didn't gaze at on a wall, but something that you physically walked through so you could really experience what that was like. I also collaborated with a sound artist in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Susan Alexander, who was also investigating what I was investigating, but using sound. And what she does is to capture the vibrations that come from atoms and elements, and using the Lamore frequency, which is a frequency used for MRI, she's able to make audible these vibrations, and then she's able to compose with them. And so you not only experience the periodic table visually, but you got to experience it sound-wise, and it was very powerful. Actually, in the 1 month period it was installed at the Great Arrest and Art Center in Northern Virginia, we had over 4,000 people come through and walk through it, and it was just a wonderful experience. I'm also excited to announce here that Harvard University will be featuring this periodic table as part of their new 21st century online chemistry course, and it will also be permanently installed in the new science building at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I'd like to end my talk today with a project that I've done with my students at Northern Virginia Community College in Alexandria, Virginia, where I'm a college professor. And a colleague in the humanities department came to me who's very passionate about the environment. He said, I want you to read this book, Earth. It's really important. And I'd like for you to maybe help me think of a way we can get students really excited about it. So anyway, I took a look at the book, and Earth Day was coming up in about 3 or 4 months, and I said, I have an idea. I had an epiphany. And my epiphany was to get copies of the book, distribute them to my design students, have them read it or glance at it, and have them use the book as a vehicle to express something having to do with the environment. And this is 2 wonderful examples of what the students did. They literally transformed this book. And again, you know, a lot of times I think people think of books as very two-dimensional. They're flat, and we read them, and they make us see things in 3 dimensions. What I was inviting my students to do was to totally take the concept of the book and transform it into a really profound visual that would express some of their feelings about the environment. So these are actual 2 examples, as you can see. The books were, actually pages of the books were used to create the structure of the sculptures. There were a lot of repurposed, recycled things to talk about that aspect of it. And in the same way, my work is about transforming aspects of things that I have learned from books. This is another example that I've tried to instill in my own students, is to use books as a very transformational tool. Thank you very much.